I've come to Endcliffe Park for today's video blog, and I'm pleased because we've got a nice sunny day, a nice blue sky, and it's not too cold. Every time I keep coming out somewhere to do a video blog, it keeps ending up freezing or raining or something, although it is a bit muddy. But I've chosen Endcliffe Park for a particular reason today. That's because it's World Autism Awareness Week. It's 2nd of April today. It was April Fool's Day yesterday, and this overall week is known as World Autism Awareness Week. Can't remember who invented it. Might have even been a United Nations thing, a bit like the good old Pride Month. I can't remember. I'll have to look into that one. But the reason I've come to Endcliffe Park for this video is because this year the National Autistic Society are doing their fundraising here in Endcliffe Park. They're doing a Spectrum Colour Walk, I think it was called. So I have no affiliation to the National Autistic Society. In fact, I don't actually support them. But I believe the Colour Walk, as far as I'm aware, they basically just walk around in colour or wearing National Autistic Society t-shirts. Now in the past they've done Spectrum nighttime walks, which I thought were a bit inaccessible, because I think they did one in Manchester a couple of years ago and I was going to go to it, but it was something like 1 o'clock in the morning. I think the idea is you walk there at night, and that's a bit difficult because there's issues with public transport. You know, you can't really get anywhere at 1 o'clock in the morning. Whereas, you know, buses up here, we have buses every few minutes up here, up at Ecclesall area, but not that early in the morning. But the reason for the Autism Awareness Week is that really a lot of people don't actually know what autism is. For instance, autism's a spectrum. It ranges from everywhere from people who don't get diagnosed until they're in the 50s and have had marriages and children and successful careers, like the sort you get who do TV documentaries, down to people like me who have slightly failed attempts at careers and come out in parks with video cameras doing blogs, right down to people who are stuck in hospitals and sometimes can't speak, can't look after themselves, have no chance of working, basically need 24/7 care. So it's a spectrum, and a lot of people don't realise that. People sometimes see the likes of me and think, well, you know, it can't be that bad, or they see people who are very seriously ill and then look at people like me and think, well, you're not seriously ill, so what's your problem? So that's one of the problems with the spectrum disease. You don't actually know. Often people don't actually realise what a spectrum is. So I think the first thing to wonder is, what does the National Autistic Society actually do? I've suffered from Asperger's syndrome, I was going to say 20 years. It was diagnosed nearly 20 years ago. Technically I've had it all my life. I don't really know what the National Autistic Society do, or at least not what they do that's charitable. I used to get a magazine from them. I subscribed to that in 2010. It was called Asperger United. It's been going on for a number of years, but I quite liked it. It was a quarterly magazine, it was free. I quite liked getting it, but they stopped doing it about 5 or 6 years ago, or at least stopped doing it for free. They started charging for it, and it was one of those things that's a bit like the Metro newspaper that you pick up on the bus. I quite liked getting it for free, but it didn't really seem worth paying for. And I was having a bit of trouble with income at the time. I was on benefits and going through the appeals process and didn't have any money coming in, and was spending my savings on medical care because the NHS is inadequate. It didn't really seem worth paying for, so I scrapped it and haven't bothered since. I don't know if they still do it, but it was a decent enough magazine. Used to enjoy reading it, but that's the only thing I've ever had from the NAS. The only other things that I believe they do is schools and care homes. There was a bit of a scandal a few years ago. They run a care home. Turns out people had been abused quite seriously for many years. The CQC, I think, found them guilty of it, but they never really had any prosecutions, so no real justice for the victims. And they do schools, and that's about it. But they're private schools. They're not charitable schools, they're private schools, but they're probably not paid for. You probably don't go there and pay the fees yourself, or pay them yourself as a family. Chances are you will have the local authority pay for them. So they're basically providing a private service which the local authority should really be providing themselves. So that's the case actually with quite a lot of charities. We end up with charities who are providing services which really the local authority should be providing themselves, because ultimately you and I are paying for it through taxes anyway. So today we've got a colour walk in Endcliffe Park. I can't really tell you a lot about it, but what I can tell you is from their literature, you've got to raise a minimum of £100. That's they say is the amount you've got to raise in order to help cover the cost of the event, which I'm sure is ridiculously expensive in a big public park like this. That probably excludes people like me because, of course, we don't. Not that I want to raise money for them, but you know, we don't really have that many people who are on incomes high enough to donate enough. They say there's no coloured powder due to it being autism friendly, so they are at least trying to make autistic people come to the event. You do sometimes see these colour runs, colour walks. They sort of throw all this coloured paint or coloured powder over people, and it makes a bit of a mess, but it looks quite fun. That I can imagine would be a bit of troublesome for a lot of autistic people. And they say no dogs, as people will be present. As autistic people, we want to be present and we want everyone to be comfortable. That's reasonable to say, but I don't quite get how you exactly going to enforce that. I mean, we're in a park. I've lost count of the number of dogs. I don't think there's any in the background now, but I've lost count of the number of dogs we've had in the park. You know, it's a park, people take dogs. What do they expect? So I'll admit, I don't really know what the big deal is with the National Autistic Society. They don't really do anything for individual patients, or especially not adults like us, or like me. Perhaps they do for children, because that's where the money is. If parents are on decent incomes, they can pay for it, or the local authority might pay for it. But there's nothing really for people like my age. The only thing I will give the NAS credit for is they do publish some actual useful information about autism. It's factually correct. It's not pushing anti-vax stuff. It doesn't push fake cures. They don't go in for don't automatically go in for the Hans Asperger was a Nazi type stuff. They are relatively balanced in their approach to information, and they do provide useful information. So I will admit the NAS is the first place I would probably direct people to if they wanted information. But if you need help, if you've been diagnosed with it, or if you're a doctor and you've got a patient who's been diagnosed, or you're the family of someone who's been diagnosed, don't expect any practical help from the NAS. Well, there's a few people over there. Team Autism, I think that says. I can see that on the camera screen, but I can't actually see it in real life. It's amazing how these cameras can see far more than my bad eyesight can. One thing that's worth asking, just before we finish the video, is are there any charities that actually do support the people with autism, or at least adults with autism? And that's a really difficult question to answer. I'm not really aware of any. There are often local groups, like there's one here in Sheffield Autistic Society. I think we do have one or two groups in Rotherham. There are other local groups in like West Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, but it's very difficult. I mean, sometimes they're only for what you call high functioning autism, so Asperger's syndrome and above. Sometimes they're more aimed at the lower end of the spectrum, so people who can't easily care for themselves. There's some schemes that aim to help get people into work. I believe we do have one here somewhere in Sheffield city centre, but I think that's aimed mostly at Sheffield, so it wouldn't apply to people like me who are from Rotherham. But it is questionable as to whether it's sort of low-end minimum wage jobs or whether it's more professional jobs. You know, people may well be more inclined to do a minimum wage job because it's easier to get, but then if they've got professional qualifications like I have, you prefer a professional job, but you know, can you actually get the professional job in the first place if you don't have enough experience? It's always a very difficult situation, and one I've been in many times. There's some they only seem to intend on you doing unpaid work, so work for charities and so on. Yeah, it's very difficult to actually recommend any organisation, because they may well provide a service and what works for you may not work for me, or vice versa. But I think it's safe to say that the National Autistic Society don't really do much.